CIUT 89.5 FM.
It's the Bill and Jess King Show on CIUT 89.5 on a sunny afternoon. I guess it's appropriate.
With Gloria
Sunny
Martin.
morning. Yeah, with Gloria
I'm
Martin.
here.
Sidekick.
I'm here.
And in
Yeah.
the hot seat today, which is not that hot.
This is a good get here today.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the career, you'll know.
This is
But
music
it's where do you
royalty.
start?
Music royalty.
You will,
part of- yeah,
you will start probably in Flatbush in Brooklyn or something like that.
That's right.
Close. Bensonhurst.
Bensonhurst, yeah. Our special guest today is Paul Hoffert. I can't believe that. Lighthouse fame and all sorts of fame. Film,
You know,
radio,
looking
TV.
through your credentials, I'm like, I have to highlight certain things because
Yeah.
time is limited of what we can talk
Yeah.
about with you. Amazing career, part of the foundation of Canadian music and Canadian rock, going back decades now. And you were saying you never wanted to get old.
I never expected to get old.
This was pre-planned. You had it worked out when you were young.
I mean, I remember when I was in my 20s that my friends and I would talk about, we hope that we just flame out before we're 30 because 30 is like just so old.
And now, what are your thoughts about 30?
Oh, no, I can't remember.
But you run into these people say, well, wouldn't you want to be 30 again? And I always say, no.
No, I agree.
That was too complicated.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You get, as you age, there are some compensating factors.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but
Yeah.
there are some. One of them is that when you're young and you do things that seem really crazy, people really say, oh, that guy's like, he's nuts and everything like that. You know, add 60 years and they say, oh, that's an old guy. He's got character.
That's exactly it. And then the other side of it is that when you're young, you're walking around with a phone or you're walking around and you're thinking the next person, they're all looking at me. And you don't really understand that nobody's looking at you.
You know what they call that?
Right? And
It's
then you
called
understand when you're older, nobody's looking at you.
It's called the spotlight effect.
Is that what it's
actually,
called?
yeah, that's
Oh.
the term for it. And
Yeah.
what it is that people have this theory that everybody is looking at them. But they've done all these studies.
Yeah.
And they came up with the same conclusion. Nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
No.
So, I mean, that you're walking along and you're fixing your mascara or you're working on your biceps and you're walking along, your chest is pumped out. People are going by going, oh, I got other things to think about. What a beautiful dog walking across the street, you know? It's good stuff.
Can we start with this amazing relationship
Yeah.
between Paul and Brenda Hoffert?
I think it's a good
they
one.
actually met when they were 13 years old. Tell me
Yeah.
about that.
We met accidentally. We had a double date. Brenda went to Vaughan Road Collegiate, and I was at Bathurst Heights Collegiate. So we were at different schools. But Brenda had a friend, Pam Nash, who I had asked out on a date. And she was afraid to go with me because I was from Brooklyn. And New Yorkers had a reputation in those days of being, I don't know,
Dangerous.
Aggressive.
dangerous for young women
yeah.
in some kind of way. So she wanted a double date. So Brenda came along on the date. I can't remember if she had a date or she was just a plus one. But anyway, she had a date. There you go. And anyway, and we just really hit it off and we became friends. So that was the first and last time I saw Pam Nash in a social situation. But I stayed in touch with Brenda. And then for a couple of years, Brenda became part of my little circle of music friends because I always managed to hang out with, big surprise, people who like jazz. I mean, young people generally don't like jazz. Usually an acquired thing as you get a little older. But there were some 14-year-olds at Bathurst Heights, and we hung out together and went to jazz clubs. And so Brenda was always part of that group, and she first became, she was a girlfriend of Peter Waxer, one of my good friends, and then of Ricky Marcus, who was a drummer who played with a lot of good jazz musicians in Toronto. So after making the rounds of the low-hanging fruit in the neighborhood, we became an item. But it was after a year or two of speaking with each other, maybe every day on the phone. And as I recall now, I think one of the things we really had in common is that we were both really artsy-fartsy people, like going to galleries and museums and art openings and a lot of music concerts. And I remember when I started dating Brenda that probably, this is going to sound, bad, but it's the truth. It's about me. So what would happen is I'd go on a date with Brenda, and my mom and dad would say, okay, where are you going? Oh, Brenda, she's a nice girl. So as I was walking out the door, my dad would slip me $5 so I could take her to a movie or something. And, I didn't want me to be embarrassed. And then I'd pick up Brenda at her place, and as we were leaving, her dad would slip me $5.
Oh, wow.
Listen to this.
No,
You were covered, man.
No, this is the best part of the stories to come. Then we would go to the AGO, which was free, and I would make $10 on every date that we
Man, the dude was banking it.
You were on a savings plan.
Yeah, he was banking his dating system.
And how many years have you been together now?
Oh, I don't know. A long time.
It's got to be in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. A long
She
time.
would know.
She would know.
Yeah.
65 years?
65. See, there you go.
So I'm 49, and we've been
You do the
together for
math.
60. I don't know. Something's not working out here.
So I'm thinking about your childhood, right?
Yes.
Your family in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
This must have been something else. Were you in like a brownstone or?
Well, we actually had a house in a residential neighborhood of Brooklyn.
All right.
And my parents had both been they were both immigrants from two parts of Europe. So my mom was born in what's now the Ukraine. At the time it was part of Russia.
Right.
And when her mom and dad conceived of her, it was around the time of the Russian Revolution. And around that time, it was very disruptive in terms of war. There are always wars going on in Europe. But around that time, there was the white Russians and the black Russians and the communists and all these different things. And they lived in a little town. And what would happen is, and I never was able to visualize what it might have been like until I saw the movie Dr. Zhivago.
Okay.
And
yes,
when I saw the
yes.
movie Dr. Zhivago, in the movie they depict what it's like in these towns when the next little private army would come through and everyone they suspected of collaborating with the other side would get shot. And then they would just, for fun, torch the whole town and burn it. So when my mother was probably, I'd say 11 years old, her father, my grandfather, who had immigrated to the United States some 3 or 4 years previous to then, and he was supposed to become rich like all the immigrants did and send for them, but that never happened. He worked in a sweatshop in New York. And anyway, their village, their town, was burnt down. And my mom, her older brother, who might have been about 13 or 14, and their mother, my grandmother, escaped when the town was burning and somehow lived in the forest and ate bark off trees or whatever it is, and over a period of maybe 6 months, eventually made themselves to some sort of Red Cross rehabilitation refugee center. I'm not sure where, but it might have even been in Italy, and I don't know the story of how they would have gotten from the Ukraine there, but anyway, they did that. And then they came to the United States. So by the time they got to the United States, my mom was a mid-teenager, and my father was born in Poland, in the south of Poland, was a family with 10 kids, with 6 boys, and 4 girls. I guess that makes 10. And the boys left home in Poland when they reached 13 or 14 to go. Actually, the 3 youngest boys, of which my dad was one of them, one by one went to Germany, where they were illegally selling linens, peddling them door to door, and loved the German people, loved the country, loved that they were out from under the thumbs of their Orthodox Jewish parents,
Right.
who, circumscribed everything they could do. And here they were, 14, 15, and 16, like one by one.
Liberating for them.
Yeah, they were going out with the girls and like going to the bars and having a good time, and then writing to their parents, "Oh, we're very good. We don't do anything bad," and sending money home. So they were the earners. And in my dad's case, this is kind of interesting for me. I asked him, did he ever see Hitler? And he was there when Hitler was coming to power, just before he was voted into the parliament there. And he remembers when Hitler used to come on a Jeep, and they'd have a megaphone, and they'd stop it, and he'd make a speech. And my dad said he was really fantastic. He said if it wasn't for the fact that he was Jewish, and Hitler was saying he was going to kill all the Jews, he could understand how the German people
How they got swept up in
how
this.
could they
Yeah.
get stepped up. He was a wonderful orator, and his arguments, like somebody south of the border who's, we won't mention Trump's name. Anyway.
But his arguments don't make any sense.
Right. Anyway, so he knew he had to get out, especially since Hitler had written a book. He wrote a book called Mein Kampf. So he was trying to get out of Poland before they gathered him up and did bad things to him. And everybody wanted to immigrate to the United States, of course. So he wrote a letter to his Uncle Joe in New York City, who had come previously to the United States and had citizenship. He asked him if he would sponsor him to come to the United States. And his uncle turned him down. So here he was stuck. And the only reason I'm here to have this little interview with you is that a couple of weeks after that, he was in a bar in somewhere in Germany, and he met a U.S. businessman who had some business in Germany, and they were in a bar and they were having a beer together, and the guy said, "Are you Jewish?" My dad said, "Yeah." He says, "What's it like?" And there are stories that it's going to be bad for the Jews in Germany, and he said. Yeah, he told him what he thought, that he had heard Hitler speak, and he was hoping to get out. He says, "Well, why don't you come to the United States?" My father, "It's not so easy. You have to have somebody sponsor you." I wrote to my uncle. He turned me down. The guy said, "That's crazy." He said, "I'll sponsor you. Like, who wouldn't? Like, I could be saving your life." He says, "It's no big deal." And my father responded something like, "It is a really big deal, because if you sponsor somebody, you have to sign a piece of paper with the government that they won't be a burden on."
That's right.
On the American thing. So you have to say that you will look after them financially until they have a job and you pay the Social Security and get on the route to American citizenship. And anyway, and part of the story, I've never been able to understand, not just for my dad, but for anything that happened in the world before we had telephones and good mail service everywhere and all of those things. Somehow, the guy went back to the United States and was able to contact my dad, who was moving from town to town in Germany because he didn't have any papers. He bribed the police or whatever it is, and said, "Here's a ticket on a boat." And he says, "I'll meet you at Ellis Island, and we'll straighten it all out." And my dad went, And this Good Samaritan, not a Jewish guy, Christian guy, met him at Ellis Island and signed the papers and then started walking away. And my father said, wait, how do I get in touch with you? Can you give me your address? And he says, no, don't be silly. He said, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. And the reason I know that story is because when I was growing up, and maybe even when I was like 8 or 9 years old, I remember my father was always hiring private detectives to try to find this Good Samaritan.
Wow.
So he could thank him for saving his life. And unfortunately, he never did. But it's a feel-good story.
It's remarkable.
So you got these two immigrants. So my mom and my dad met on the beach in Coney Island. Where,
You gotta love that.
where he
Who bought the hot dogs?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a real American romance story.
Wow.
Anyway, so I come from an immigrant family who, I mean, every family has their own dynamic. But in our family, my brother, who's 5 years older than I, and I were really, seen as lucky gifts. Of the luck of the draw that my parents made it, and they just wanted us to be happy. They didn't spoil us, but I think my dad would have liked it if we would have gone into some kind of business and become
Traditional business.
Yeah, traditional business, or a doctor or a lawyer or
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
But they never ever. Whatever we wanted to do. So my brother knew from the time he was a young kid he wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. He was interested in space and all that kind of stuff, and that's what the path he took. And I never had any idea of growing up. I've always been kind of an airhead. I live a lot in the moment, and I've never planned for my life. So this idea of a life path and looking retrospectively back on my life is a fairly new thing for me. I remember very, very little when I was about my life. And as my friends and relatives know well, when I do remember something, I'll often embellish it with made-up things that I'm just filling in the gaps that I maybe don't remember.
That work well.
So they always take everything with a grain of salt. But I'd say over the last 15 years, I've had a lot of people that I know just say, I have a lot of stories. Everybody has stories. I have a lot of pretty good stories. Not my opinion. Other people say it. You should write them down. You should write your
That's right.
memoirs, write an autobiography or something like that. And I thought that would be a good idea. And although my memory isn't good, I did have, and once computers came out, it was fantastic to me because I basically took all of the newspaper articles and, Bill, we were talking about
Yes.
you saving
Archiving.
the archiving and everything like that.
Very much so.
Whatever I had, diaries and everything like that, I made it all, I put it into computer files. And so I could go, I just had to organize it. The problem I had with doing something like that, I had two problems. One, why? Who cares? Mostly people don't care. We asked our kids. They were interested, but not that interested. And the other thing is that most of what I wanted to document in my life had to do with media. I had, made my first rock and roll sort of single record when I was 12 years old. So, and I had the record. So I transferred the record. I had a file.
Of course.
I had an audio file. But how do I give the reader, if I did it as just a book, written some books, so it wasn't good at first, but I learned how to do that. And how do you give them a taste of what's happening? And I, worked in the movies, so I have video files, audio files, press clippings, things that are visual. And so I've been thinking for a long time of what would be a good system to gather all the materials, which are all in different media, and do it. And fortunately, one of my friends that I met a long time ago. I don't know, you know, maybe he's your father. I'm not sure. No, he's one of the Kings. It's Bill King.
Oh, yeah,
That's
yeah.
his name.
Yeah,
Oh, that guy.
Bill King.
He's still hanging around.
Still hanging around.
Yeah.
Gave me a call and said, you know, we want to do this little thing at a little theater, and would I be interested in
At the Redwood Theater.
At the Redwood Theater.
Like next Wednesday, the
yeah,
16th.
coming up, the
Yeah.
16th,
Yeah.
next week. And I thought to myself, that's a great idea. I really want to do this because I can use this, and I'm very sort of transactional in a practical way with life. And that is, in this case, I thought, by doing this, it will force me to gather up some of these materials that I have and figure out how to organize them in a way that can fit into a small amount of time. Anyway, and I thought, oh, I remember I used to use this thing called PowerPoint a long time ago, and I don't want to do a slideshow, but in PowerPoint, you can just put video into it. You can put audio. You can put sound.
Yes, you can.
And you can put photos and pictures. And at the bottom of each slide is this room for notes that you can just write and put stuff in it. So that's what I started doing. So thank you very much, Bill, for sparking this. And here I am doing an interview.
Yes, with each other. But I want to go back in time.
Yeah.
You're talking about the immigrant story.
Oh, yeah.
In my new book, it's basically the life of an immigrant new to Canada.
Right.
Okay, no papers, no illegally here, trying to get started, a baby coming soon, a wife. And then you think of the people, how did you get started? How did you get a footing? And it was you and Brenda.
Wow.
We always talk about this. This is the reason.
This is what I was going to bring up. You've known each other for
Yeah.
50-something years now.
And I often wonder, why us? Why did he take an interest in us? Why did he say, let me sign you to our record company. Let me put your album out. And in the book, I write about something really, I've never seen this amount of money in my life. We signed the record deal with Capitol Records, and he goes, let me go to KPAC. I know Mary Butternall, and get you in advance. So he gets me $5,000. And I get this $5,000 check, and I can't believe I've never seen this amount of money. The first thing I do is go to Remini House of Music.
Of course.
And I negotiate with them and buy a piano. And it's delivered the next day. I take cash. Then the next thing I said is I've learned to cycle, and this started my lifelong, and even Jesse's world of cycling. I bought 2 white Peugeots, one for her and one for me. And we have never stopped cycling since. And then I bought a chunk of Afghani hash.
Of course you did.
I bought Chris a fur coat, a fur jacket. And then the rest we just banked. And from that point on, you would say to me, okay, I've got a movie I'm working on. I want you to play keyboard on it. And this rolled through the 70s until we left, and I went on to do other things in the States. And so when I came back in the 80s, I'm talking to Paul again, and he's with Morgan Earl. And he says, I need you to play keyboards. And I would play keyboards on the sessions there, and then he would have a movie here and there, and I would do that for Paul and stuff over the years. It's the big thank you. That's all I can say is...
You're very welcome. And, of course, the main reason that we may have assisted you is just because why wouldn't you assist anybody?
Much like your father.
Much like my father.
Yeah,
that was one of the messages I
Paying
got.
it forward.
Yeah, I got a couple of messages from my father that were really, really good. There was that. And the other thing is I noticed when I was a kid that once a month we would go to 2 of his other brothers, also that he was with in Germany, survived and came to the United States, and we knew them, my cousins and that. And we would go there once a month or so and have a little visit for 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And on the way out, he'd kind of shake my uncle's hand or whatever it was. And I remember one time I said, it's kind of funny when you shake your brother's hand. He says, don't talk about it. He said, they're having a hard time financially. He said, you should always help people out if they don't have if they don't have enough. He said it's not their fault, you know. And he said, but I got to tell you one thing. People talk a lot about charity, but charity is not something that you talk about.
No.
He says it's not something you basically, and you try as much as possible to downplay it and to not do it because you don't want to demean.
It's not the accolades.
It's not the accolades.
No,
And it's
you're
not
absolute.
to demean the person that they need it because they're just maybe not as fortunate as you are in this and that.
And it's when you bring people into their lives who have no people,
Yeah.
and you hold them there.
Yeah. There you go.
There you go.
Anyway, so that's the beginning of Brooklyn.
So, do you want to? I got a question for Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
I mean,
sure.
really, you've been involved in so many facets within the music industry as a composer, as part of a band, and everything else. But one thing that struck me is looking. You've written numerous books as well, but there was a theme. So I'm looking back at 1998, The Bagel Effect, the compass to navigate our wired world. 2000 is Altogether Now, Communities Connected. 2002, The New Client, How Customers Shape Business and Information Age. And then on, there's a theme, it's technology. So then I go back further, and I want to make sure this is actually accurate. That
What was it? He invented the
St.
The
Clavier.
Clavier?
Yeah, the
Clavier.
Clavier, yeah.
I'm looking, and you worked at the National Research Council. Is this true?
It is true.
This is 69 to 71. In 77 to 82, you worked at Apple, and then you founded and directed the Caltech Research Center at York University. What is it about technology? Is it the possibilities of it? What's up that attracted you going back? I mean, this is decades. This is in its very nascency when you're working at the National Research Council.
I've always thought that when I've looked back at my CV or my bio, and from time to time, I have to submit one of those things. So I read it and I say, like, this guy sounds fantastic. I'd really like to meet him. I think the organizing theme of my life is innovation. I've always liked to improvise in music. I've always liked to do that. And I get incredibly passionate about discovering new things and doing new projects. And once I get to figure it out, sort of, I lose interest. So I'm always an early adopter of technology because I always want to be like, it's a new thing, you know, now it's artificial intelligence. It's just like, even at my age, I'm thinking of, I got to get into this because it's so nice.
Right.
So I think that innovation is the theme that goes through it. And I've had to compartmentalize my life into, say, 2 or 3 main themes, one of which is technology. Because my main theme, I mean, throughout my whole life, from the time I was a kid, when people would say, what do you do? How do you, you know, it was always musician and music. So that's my big passion, bigger passion than technology. But I have an aptitude. I'm a smart guy by certain measures, but the measures that you need to take university, you know, theoretical physics and mathematics and that sort of stuff.
That ain't us.
But it's hard to communicate with the folks in the technology and science world, which I love and whom I love as people, and really talk about why the arts and music are able to give me a kind of passion because of the emotional connection that I have, and especially with an audience, you know. And you know well, Bill, there's like there's one way that you can divide all of humankind, and that there's those people who, when they get on a stage, feel like a deer in headlights and underperform.
Oh my God.
And those of us who only feel
Comfortable.
comfortable.
I always, in the classes that I teach, and I try to tell people that you need the ability to cut the distance down between the audience and you. And most people don't have that.
Right.
You know, we look at a Tony Bennett. I've said this many times, but a Tony Bennett would walk out on stage, raise his arms, look into the lights, and his eyes would sparkle. Now, he did that many times, and he knew the light would hit his eyes a certain way and send off that pew. You know what I mean? Or B.B. King would come out and do a few little gyrations, and he knows this is what you expect from him, and then he'd play.
Right.
And he'd be comfortable on it. Most people come out, they got a music stand in front of their face, they stand there, they sing, and they look, and they expect people to react. It's not the same. With Lighthouse, you're walking around, you've got your little Herbie Hancock keyboard there. You're still doing your entertainment thing. It's all part of the thing. It's about, stage is about, if you're not sitting at a piano or something, it's still about a movement. Especially when you're the visual thing, people's eyes are on you, they're locked on you, and we expect something from that. So whether it's just a facial movement or something special about you that stands there or there, we can tell. You're magnetic. You have something that draws people and keeps people's attention.
Absolutely. I'm going to come back to your questions about my childhood, if you don't mind, because I'm just remembering. When I was 8 years old, one of the first and maybe only memory I have before I was like 20 was my class in Brooklyn went to, it was at Madison Square Gardens in Manhattan, and they had a children's show. They had a little TV studio, and the show was called Mr. Imagination. And along with Howdy Doody, I think it was the only two children's shows that were on. 8 years old, 1943, 1951.
Yeah.
And so my friends and I would watch it because we had a...
And you're 8?
Yeah, I was 8, and not many kids showed.
Makes sense.
And I remember the guy, Paul Tripp, the actor, was Mr. Imagination. And anyway, and I always thought, he's looking right at me. He's really just talking to me, just like he's being in my room. How fantastic. And then my class went on an outing to be the audience at one of these Mr. Imagination TV shows. It was a series. And I realized that he was just looking into a television camera. And I was too young to understand anything about the technology. But it gave me a Wizard of Oz kind of moment, you know, when they draw the curtain back.
Yep.
And I realized, and I think that's when I started getting interested in all of this sort of technology, because I just thought it was wonderful. Anyway, it took many years for the next time that particular loop closed. I was 16 years old, I think, when I started to work in television on the CBC. I don't know if you know this story. No. My whole life is about these accidental, unbelievably, almost impossible coincidences and things that happen to me as I stumble through a seemingly haphazard, unplanned life. And each time, it's sort of like I'm a pinball in a pinball machine. And you start out with a nice straight trajectory, and then you hit a bumper. You know, you have some event that changes the trajectory of your life. And in my case, it's never been planned. It's not like, oh, I want to go to Juilliard, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. But, you know, you open a door and you say, oh, that's interesting.
That's the door opening.
That's the door opening.
Man.
You know?
That is a classroom right there. That's a whole class.
That's a whole class.
Yeah.
So anyway, when I was 17, I was going to Bathurst Heights Collegiate. I'm jumping forward now because it's like, you know, we need days and days to go through all this stuff. But I remember this other thing that was really, really interesting. At Bathurst, and as a piano player, you'll probably, I don't know if you were playing by ear when you were in school, but if you could play by ear and also read music, then I was conscripted to play for all the school shows. You know, they would do little variety shows and Broadway musicals, and just like other kids would want to do a solo, and you could accompany them and that sort of stuff. So my friend Jerry Roshberg used to do this song from Kiss Me Kate called Brush Up Your Shakespeare. And the CBC had apparently put out a notice that they were looking for young talent for a summer summer series on a show called While We're Young. And he wanted to go and audition. So he said, would I come with him and accompany him, because I knew how to play the accompaniment to that Brush Off Your Shakespeare song that he did. And that was his signature number at high school. So we get to the CBC rehearsal, and he does his number, and I played a thing, and the producer and the music director come over, and I start talking to Jerry, and then they come over and they start talking to me. And they said very nice things about my piano playing and asked me, was I taking piano lessons? I said, no, I used to, and now I'm studying theory and harmony with this guy, Gordon Delmont, and so on and so forth. Anyway, we both made it onto the show as regulars. So at 17, I was a regular on a network CBC variety show, doing little numbers with my, playing vibes with my little jazz quartet or whatever it was, but I was on television every week. And I remember coming on for the first time into Studio 4, into the television studio.
Yeah.
And there were 3 cameras. And it reminded me of when I was 8 years old, and I saw the people looking into the camera, and I instinctively realized when the red light comes on a camera near you, that you're going to be on the camera. And if you want the people to think that you're communicating with them, that's where you want to look.
Better eyeball it.
And anyway, it worked out very well. But that was this whole thing about the television, broadcast, and then of course film, which is a whole different technology. But the thing about it altogether, in addition to innovation, is communication. So, Bill, you were speaking about people who just look at their music stand and they don't look at the
in front
audience.
of their face.
The thing is, the great thing about doing this interview, we have like 4 of us sitting here.
But we're looking at each other.
And we're looking at each other.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have such incredibly rich voice, facial expressions. Eyes are not just to see, but to transmit. They're not just
And
receivers.
understand.
And understand.
Receive. Yeah, yeah.
And all that's happening. And I was always fascinated by what happens when you put some kind of technology between somebody who's sending the messages, somebody who's speaking, singing, playing, whatever it is, and somebody who's receiving the messages, and how that all changes. Yeah. So that's a part that always intrigued me about technology, especially those kinds of technologies that get between the communication. And years later, of course, as I met Marshall McLuhan, and found out all about the theory, and you can talk about it and everything.
Gloria,
how to keep it real.
Yeah.
Speaking of stage presence, Lighthouse had such an incredible presence. How did it get started, and how did Duke Ellington end up introducing you on your first performance?
Okay, 2 good stories that happen to illustrate the happenstance or accidental occurrence of things. So first, how I met Skip Prokop. At the time, I can't remember the year, it might have been 1961, 62, whatever it is, I had an off-Broadway show that I wrote the music for that was running in New York, ran for 6 months. I like to call it a respectable flop. But
it's 6 months.
It was
That's a
6
good run.
months. It was
That's
a
not
good
quite
run.
a flop.
It was a good. The investors came and they were happy. They thought that that we gave it a good shot.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Brenda, my wife, and our 2 young kids at the time went down to New York. We rented a suite at the Fifth Avenue Hotel, which was right on the park. What's the park in the village?
Tompkins Square.
Yeah, one of the squares.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, East side is
The East Village.
Square?
East
Washington
Village.
Square.
Yeah, Washington Square. That's
Washington
That's
Square.
in West Village.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so one night I was walking around, and there was a rock and roll club, music hall called the Electric Circus, I believe.
Yeah.
A lot of people were playing there. So I walked in, check it out, and turns out a Canadian band was playing there. It was a band that Skip Prokop was in called
Poppers.
the Poppers.
Yeah.
And the Poppers were well known in Canada because I think they may have been the first Canadian rock band that got a U.S. manager, Albert Grossman, and a U.S. Record deal.
With Verve.
With Verve.
With Wayne Shorter's brother, Ron Shorter.
Ah,
That was his brother that signed him.
never realized that. Okay.
Yeah.
So as it happened, as I came in, the band was on a break between sets, and this guy, all dressed up like a hippie and everything, came up to me and said, "I think you're Paul Hoffert from Toronto." And it was like, what are the chances that I walk into a club in Manhattan and the band that's playing, the guy knows who I am? He said, "Oh, my name's Skip Prokop. I'm the drummer with the Poppers, and I love jazz. And I always go to the jazz clubs in Toronto, and I've seen you play a lot of times." I said, "Oh, I always ask to sit in. You guys, never let me because I have long hair." And at that time, rock and rollers were
Right.
kind of, the jazzers were
Stay out of
looking
the
down
way.
on them. So we had like maybe 3 or 4 minutes of chit chat, and he went back on to finish his show, and I went back to our.
But was he ever good? He
was-
was so good.
He was fantastic.
Yes, I saw the Poppers, and he that was it to me.
Yeah, the Poppers were
He was-
fantastic,
yeah.
and he was fantastic.
The drummer.
The next morning,
Yeah.
and here's the chance, that's one chance occurrence. I get on my Air Canada flight, and sitting next to me is Skip Prokop.
There's
Both
a
going
band.
back to
There's a
Toronto.
band right there.
So some would say, now we had an hour and a half to kill, not just 3 minutes, and nobody had to go on stage. And there's even a one step away from Bill King part of this. Skip was telling me that the night before was his last night with the Poppers because they were breaking up, and that the next gig that he had was with another act that Albert Grossman managed, Janis Joplin. So they asked Skip
Yep.
to start a new band for Janis Joplin because Big Brother and the holding company, I believe,
Broke up.
they broke up,
They
but
separated. Yeah.
And the part that Skip knew about, and hence the part that I knew about, was that their management company felt that Big Brother, while they were adequate and an okay band for her to do it,
They couldn't play in time.
they couldn't play in time, and they needed to have a better band. This is where
Yeah, but it was also
Yeah, go ahead.
her wanting to change because she had such a big background in soul music.
right.
And she wanted to go and sort of bridge that gap, which they were able to do with the band after that. But she was looking for that, where do I find myself in Otis Redding and Carla Thomas?
Right.
And yet a link to bluegrass and link to these other things. And I remember, I'm just going to say this real quick. I remember
sure.
when I saw it in Rolling Stone, it says Skip Prokop, new band leader for Janis Joplin. And then it was a guy named Mookie Kingman, who was a keyboard player who was playing with Todd Runyon. And we all knew each other in Greenwich Village. He goes, "Oh, they're looking for a keyboard player." And they got this guy, Skip Prokop, from up there. And I said, "Okay, that's the Poppers drummer. I got to know this guy." And I went and I took my 45, and they listened to it, and then they called me in. And then they brought my rhythm section in with Roy Markowitz and Stu Woods. And we did a recording of Piece of My Heart in front of Albert and Herb Abramson, who founded Atlantic Records. And we sort of did it like Irma Thomas, original. And they loved it. And then after that, they went, "Okay, well, you're going to be under Skip Prokop's banner and everything like this." And then they're bringing up a Canadian bass player, Brad Campbell. And I went, "Okay." The next thing I know is Skip backed out. "We want you to be the band leader." And that's how it just went like that.
That all makes sense, but I have
There's gotta be more.
I have one more question for you
Okay.
about that because I've only heard this story
Yeah.
through Skip's lens,
Okay, this one over here.
and this is why he backed out.
Okay.
So, on this airplane ride back to Toronto, Skip said that his next gig was going to be to put together Janis's band, but he was having disagreements with her with respect to the guitar player, who he had identified as perhaps the weakest link,
Yes.
but who was also Janis's boyfriend and drug dealer.
Okay. You want me to follow up on that?
Does this ring?
Okay. Yeah. And a lovely person, Sam.
Yeah.
Sam was a guitar player, heroin addict, but very, very smart man. And the situation was when we sit down to play to rehearse, and we're going to go into this new sort of music, he's still playing that old Wade psychedelic stuff. She's expecting Steve Cropper. So we're at the Fillmore, and she calls in Mike Bloomfield. She wants to get Mike Bloomfield to look at the band. So Mike Bloomfield comes in, and he jams with us, and Sam sits to the side. Me and Roy and Stu lose our mind.
Of
and
course.
Bloomfield recorded it and then played it back on cassette player. And we're going, oh, God, can we have a copy of that, right? We thought, oh, he's going to be the guy. Then the next thing is they bring in Levon Helm. So she wanted to get a legitimate look on, is the band really a soul band? And Levon came in and he goes, that group is great. But the issue was he couldn't learn the tunes because he came from just ambling, you know.
Yeah.
And so when it came down to doing arrangements, I was able to get Raise Your Hand, which I brought to her of Eddie Floyd, and do the home like an Otis Redding, and you will see that great classic performance with Tom Jones. And that's my arrangement of Raise Your Hand, which is on film.
Wow.
It's fantastic with the band, that same band pretty much in the horns. But as you said, the pull was always, he wasn't a rhythm player, and he was that. And I did go out with him one day to go see his friends in Haight-Ashbury. And I'm not in that world. And I walked in, and they were all laying against the wall. They had all just shot up, and I went, I got to get out of this world.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
again, through Skip's lens, this is great because this is a
Fill it in the blanks.
validation.
Yeah.
Well, it's like two sides, but they fit. So Skip said to me, I don't think this thing with Janis is going to work out because if she won't let go to the guitar player, I can't. I'm not going to be able to get it.
Yeah.
He said, if I don't do the thing with Janis, I have this idea for a band. This was Skip's idea, and he said, and the way he phrased it, he said, I don't know about you, Paul, but I love the movies and I love film scores. And I said, you love the movies and you love film scores? I've written a couple of film scores and I love what kind of music do you like? He said, I love the big orchestral stuff, like the big westerns that come in over the thing and you hear the French horns and the strings come in.
Oh, man.
And all of that. And I said, you like jazz and you like all this stuff. So where's this going to lead to? And he says, yeah, I have an idea for a band that would have horns and strings, but a rock and roll rhythm section. And he said, maybe we could do it together because you know all the horn and string players because you're always working in the studios and everything like that. And I know the rock people. And he said, if the thing with Janis doesn't work out, maybe we could put together this new band. And he says, and the other thing I was thinking about is that all the production of rock and roll and pop music, since George Martin started putting piccolo trumpets and French horns
That's right.
and strings, has gotten to the point where bands like the Beatles can no longer tour because they can't do the records. People listen to the records and they listen to, listening to all the orchestral stuff. And unless they carry a whole orchestra, which is, no promoter wants that, then they can't tour. He said, I want to put together a band that everything we record in the studio, we can play live in front of an audience just the same. And he said, would you be interested? I said, well, see what happens with Janis, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks later, Skip called me, and he said the thing didn't work out with Janis. Now you know why he pulled out.
Yeah.
And he said, you want to do the band thing? So I went home. We were living in a low rental apartment in Jane Finch area. And I said, so what do you think about this idea of a rock and roll band? And she said, well, what about our other plans for Africa? At this time, we had decided that being young parents and not very attached to anything. We wanted to do some, I don't want to say a crazy thing, but some out-of-the-box thing with traveling, or that we probably wouldn't be able to do once the kids were entrenched in schools and all the other stuff. And I met this guy at a party whose uncle was, I believe, the president of Kenya. And Kenya was a country in Africa that was being wooed by the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And either one or the other gave him a whole bunch of film equipment. And so this guy who was like the nephew said, my uncle called, and he said they have all this film equipment, millions of dollars of filmmaking equipment, and nobody in Kenya knows how to make a film. He said, you've made a couple of films. I said, I've done the score for a couple of films. He said, you made he said, more than anybody else in the country. He said, if you want, we'll let you teach at the university. You can teach music and film. And so anyway, Brenda and I said, okay, let's go to Africa, see what happens. Go in the bush, record some music, stuff like that. So she said, well, I think this rock and roll band, it's like the same kind of thing. It's like the same category.
Yeah.
We took a coin, and one side we wrote on it rock and roll, and the other side we wrote Africa, and we tossed it. And it came up rock and roll, and I phoned Skip back, and I said, I'm in. Let's do a band.
You gotta love
Great
that.
story.
I gotta hold it there because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
And I just want to make, this is just the beginning of this conversation. Gloria knows this. Is Paul Hoffert, Trippin' the Life, fantastic. This is just a sample of what you're going to hear at the Redwood Theater on Wednesday night. I'm looking at some of the stuff. It's music director, CBC, co-founder of the Kitty and Rock Lighthouse. I didn't even get to ask you how you got on Harvard and all the other stuff because I can't do it now. 4 best-selling books, gold, platinum records, 4 Juno Awards, Order of Canada. We don't even know what you got ready, but you have something special for Wednesday night laid out, and I think everybody's going to love this. So just go to the redwoodtheater.com, get your tickets. It's 7 to 9 p.m. And it's also in what we call, you'll experience the Tetra experience with the speakers in the room. It's a great room. Rob Bowman was there recently. You were there.
We were there. It was great. I'm really looking forward to it. I've been working really hard on it to try to condense some of these little stories that, as the audience, if they stay with us, know that just any one or two of these things can be expanded and take forever. But luckily for the audience, I'm limited in time, and because I have this loaded into slides that are mostly the music and the films that are doing the talking, and I'm just kind of a guide on the side instead of the sage on the stage. So I really recommend that everybody it's available. I think it's pretty affordable also.
Oh, yes. I think it's $20-25 or something.
Something like that.
This is the series we have, and after Paul, it will be a Lane Overholt, and after that, it'll be Alan
great
Croft.
series.
This is a great series we have at the Redwood Theater. Once again, on behalf of the King family, we want to thank the Hoffert family for what you've done for us over the years and what you've done for the country and for music. It's just astounding. And I figured the best way to go out is just play some little orchestral piece of yours because we worked together on Outrageous with Craig Russell.
Oh, yes.
And I think it's called, is it Lisa's theme?
Lisa's theme.
Lisa's theme.
Liza's theme.
Liza's theme,
You're
okay?
right, yeah.
And also a big thanks to Heidi, our show producer.
Yes.
Is this the one with the vocal on it?
We'll find out.
Oh, we'll find out. Okay.
And Gloria Martin, thank you again.
Thank you.
Jesse
And
King, it's the Bill.
Paul, thank you. Brenda, thank you.
Thanks,
Yes.
Paul, Brenda.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
And it's the Bill and Jesse King show right here at CIUT 89.5.